What's going on, everyone? Today we are taking out with the old and we're putting in the new, and we're gonna talk all about transitional crops so you can grow more food in less space and more of the season. Let's go. So we're just harvesting up our broccoli here, and quick little fact for y'all, you don't have to pull out your broccoli as soon as you harvest your main head. So here we had some Waltham 29 broccoli. It's a little bit of an earlier broccoli. And then we have here our Calabrese. Now our Calabrese is just starting to form that first main head, but after we harvest that main head, if you notice, you come in here, you'll see they're actually forming these smaller little side heads, if you will. And those side florets end up being a really good sized harvest after that first main harvest. So don't pull your broccoli out right away, but then after we do that second harvest, it's gonna be time, we're already into later part of June, we're gonna pull all these out and we're gonna transition our crops to something that's gonna last a lot longer and give us a lot more harvest for the space that it's being taken up. So see, if you check out this, that's where we actually harvested the first main head, and now we have these beautiful side shoots that come just off the side of that broccoli plant. And that is gonna give us another harvest, which is great. All right, and these, we're gonna harvest just these, and then we are gonna pull these plants out because we are going to transition them over to, like I said, our middle season crop. But I am really impressed. Look at the size. That's beautiful, absolutely beautiful broccoli, organically grown too. And as you'll notice, very little pest pressure. You keep the plants healthy, you keep the plants stress-free, and they'll reward you with some beautiful looking broccoli. Not the biggest I've ever grown, but hey, it would definitely get a tad bit larger yet. If we were to leave it in the garden for another couple days, these florets would kind of fill out, but I like my broccoli to be nice and young because it actually is a lot better tasting when it stays tight like that. As it starts to fill out, you get a little more spread out on the flowers, and it just gets a little more green tasting. But also, fun little fact is, even when you take your broccoli out, take your broccoli stalks out like this, take off all the leaves. A little fact here, you're gonna never ever cook broccoli the same way again after you learn this. Take these leaves off here like this, and then cut up that broccoli stem. And that right there, once you boil this up, this is probably my favorite part of the whole broccoli plant. So this is a great asset to have, and it's dense, it's a lot of food. So definitely get yourself a couple of these. You'll thank me later. Just boil them till they're tender. And one final little thing here is you can also use the leaves. We actually pull off all the leaves like this, and you can boil them and treat them just like collard. They are awesome, really, really delicious, especially when they're wilted down in a pan with just a little bit of bacon and some white wine vinegar, and they just get super tender and sweet. So use every part of the broccoli plant. It's so crazy to me that we grow a plant and we only harvest it for this, and we throw out 80% of the total plant, when 100% of that plant is edible and delicious. So use all parts of the plant, and you'll find a whole lot more uses for that broccoli than just the heads. All right, so now what you'll notice is we basically cut the stalks of the broccoli off just at soil level. Now what does that do? Well, it leaves the roots of the broccoli intact in the soil. And that's super important because a lot of people end up pulling out their plant. And when they pull out their plant, it ends up removing a bunch of dirt, a bunch of soil, and really disrupts the soil. So all we've done here is we left the roots intact, and then we're gonna transition crop, our next transitional crop, right in its place, so we don't have to worry about you disturbing the soil. And over time, that's gonna break down and decompose, and it's actually gonna add to the overall soil that we have in our beds, because those right there are actually gonna become really loose and beautiful once the worms and other creepy crawlies begin to eat away at these broccoli plants left in the soil. So as you're transitioning your crops out, just leave your roots right in the ground and then just plant right on top of them. So that's what we're gonna do, is we're gonna plant right around and right on top of those existing root bases of the broccoli plants, and it's gonna be great. So now when it comes time to transitioning your crops, a lot of people feel like there's only one growing season, right? You might plant out kale for your spring garden, and when the kale's done, well, that bed's done. A lot of people then plant out like their summer garden, right? You might plant out things like your tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, zucchini, whatnot, right? Those are your summer crops, your warm weather crops. But I'm here to tell you that that does not have to be always the case. You don't have to plant out a specific garden. What you can do is you can start with your early season crops, like we started out with our broccoli here. We have our kale, and we have our kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is gonna be harvested here pretty soon. Our kale is gonna last most of the season. But in between, we have a transitional season here where we want to be growing something, because this open soil here it's a bad thing to have open soil because that leaves more room for things like the sunlight to come down, solarize and radiate the soil, actually kill off beneficial bacteria and fungi. It also allows for rain to really penetrate down and wash away nutrients, wash away topsoil, but then it also leaves the soil open for things like weed pressure. So what we want to do is we want to actually grow more food in less space so that we're growing more food. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all the different kind of types of transitional crops you could plant. And like I said, we're going to plant bush beans here. Bush beans is just one of several different transition crops you can be growing. And I'm kind of going to also touch on how you find a good transition crop to grow, because there's a few rules that you should follow to have good success with transition cropping. So you're growing kind of all seasons, right? An all seasons garden. And once you kind of figure those things out, the light bulb pops on in your head, you're going to have a ton of fun, because now an empty space is not going to be a, maybe, I don't know, it's going to be a, I can plant that there, and I know my garden is always going to be full and producing food. So the first rule that I kind of follow to finding a good transitional crop is going to be that it is a short-term to an intermediate-term maturity date. Now, how does that really define? Well, you have short-term crops, which are things like radishes, spinach, cilantro, arugula, right? Your crops that take less than about 45 days to fully mature. Then you have your intermediate-term maturity, which is 45 to right around kind of 65 to 75 days, right? So just before tomatoes would start to mature, right? Because then you get into your long-term maturity, which are like tomatoes, peppers, onions. Those are crops that they can take anywhere from 65 on the low end all the way up to like 110 on the high end for maturity dates. And so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you're transitioning out a crop to plant something that takes 100+ days to mature, because chances are by the time that you already pull out your first crop, like for instance here is our broccoli, that first crop is done. We don't have 110 days left to plant. Like, I'm not going to plant out a giant tomato plant right now. It's just not going to be enough time for that. And so we're not going to worry about planting out big tomatoes. What we're doing is we're planting out beans, because beans are kind of that intermediate term maturity. They take about 65 days to mature. And so we're gonna have plenty of time even after the beans are done, that we're gonna have about probably 30 to 40 days left in our growing season where we can plant something else even. Like we can plant another transitional crop. And so what you're seeing from this is that we go from broccoli to beans, and then we still have time left over. We might do things like spinach to finish the season off. We might finish with some Swiss chard or kale. We might do a fall planting of cabbage even, right? So there's lots that you can transition, and it's really important that you look at those maturity dates so you find the best time to plant something out that's going to give you the most amount of transitions per season. Because for me, it's not necessarily that we're going from spring into summer, into fall, into winter. I don't look at necessarily those 4 seasons. What I really look at is the amount of time I have left in my growing season and trying to maximize open space that I might have with the amount of days that I have left, to try to just always have something growing so my bed is always full. Second rule that I'll follow is I will generally always re-amend the soil. The reason why I say generally always and not always is because in our case here we're planting beans. Beans are legumes. Beans and peas, they will be nitrogen fixers into the soil. They don't like a lot of nitrogen, excess nitrogen in the soil, or they will get really large, super beautiful, and they won't produce a whole lot of pods for us. So those are the crops that if you're transitioning those into the garden, I would not re-amend, but I would always recommend, if you're planting something that's going to be taking up nitrogen, taking up nutrients, that if you had a crop already growing here, like in our case, we had broccoli growing, I'm going to recommend you take that plant up, give the bed a good scratch over to kind of loosen that soil up again, add maybe a little bit of compost or even a little bit of slow release organic fertilizer, all purpose of course, and that way those plants that you're growing are going to grow to their best potential as well. Because oftentimes gardeners, they amend their soil in the spring, and you might be this way. I know I fell into this category where you kind of see your garden as a season, but you also see the time when you would amend your soil as a season, right? We typically will amend the soil in the spring to get ready for the garden. The thing is, you have to kind of break this whole gardening season into many different gardens, right? So we had a garden, right? Just a unit of broccoli. When that broccoli is gone, we have to just completely start with a clean slate and say, okay, what are we left with? Where's the soil level? What's the nutrient level? Should we give back? Should we build up? Because if we're growing something else here and we're constantly taking withdrawals from that bank account, we got to make sure that that bank account has good funds in it so we don't run into the negative. And so By that, I'm kind of giving you an example of nutrients and fertility, right? So we want to make sure we're always putting nutrients back into the soil. Could not be more important. And I find a lot of gardeners, they only do it once, and they say, well, my garden's ready for the season. And so then that second crop always suffers, and the third crop might suffer even more. So here's another great example of a transitional crop. So this lettuce here, we are going to be pulling this lettuce out in probably the next 2 weeks or so. We've harvested from this about 5 times already. It's given us tons of lettuce. We've really enjoyed it. But over time, it starts to get bitter, starts to go to seed as the weather gets warm. And it's super important we plant something here so we have room to grow, and we're always having our beds full. And so I know that I talked about planting out beans, but I want to give you some other ideas of some crops that you could actually transition, because so many people, their mind has not been open to this possibility. And if you fall into this category, I really hope that you're being inspired to always filling up your garden with something, because that way you're not only growing more food, but you're ultimately protecting your soil and conserving the quality of your beds, which is very important. So after we pulled out this lettuce here, we're gonna be left with the option to plant just about anything. And so following that first rule that we always kind of look at, which is short-term to intermediate-term transitional crop, right? The maturity date is anywhere from 25 all the way up to about 65 days. Opens up a huge window of opportunities. And so I always like to look at what season I'm going into. Now, I know that I did say I don't really look at, is it spring, summer, fall, or winter, right? I don't really look at those times because I look more like how many days I have left in my growing season. But the other thing I do look at is the temperature at which we're going into or transitioning into. You see, if we had this lettuce here, we pull this lettuce out, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to go back and plant some more lettuce. Lettuce would be a wonderful transition crop, but not for the season that we're moving into, the warmer weather. It's gonna go to seed very fast. And so I do always have that in the back of my mind as well. I'm gonna pick crops that are going to handle the weather that we're transitioning into. So this lettuce here, I would actually save planting a nice fall planting of lettuce for the cooler weather in fall. And I know that this lettuce is going to be able to take about 30 to 45 days to fully mature. And so I'm going to take this lettuce, once it's pulled out, I'm going to plant something that might take about 60 to 65 days. It's going to take the bulk majority of our main growing season. Might be beets, it might be something like Swiss chard, it might even be something like zucchini. Zucchini is a wonderful transition crop. Grows in the really hot, humid weather, loves that nice warm main season weather that we get. And again, it falls in that category, right? Zucchini only takes about 55 to 65 days to fully mature, and it can handle that hot weather. After the zucchini is done, then it's going to get cold. It does not do very well. It's more susceptible to powdery mildew. And that opens up the possibility to plant lettuce here again. And that's what's awesome about this, is that no longer are we growing just one crop. We're growing multiple crops in the same bed. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, Luke, what about crop rotation, right? Do we recommend crop rotation? Is there any negative side effects to growing lettuce here again later in the season? The answer is no, there isn't. And we talked about this. And it's okay if you feel like you should be crop rotating. It's common. But the thing we always talk about is that crop rotation is more or less beneficial on a large scale. Big swaths of land, large agricultural models use crop rotation because it's really difficult to re-amend and bring the fertility back to an area when you're talking about 50 to 100 acres of land. It's very easy when you're talking about 16 square feet. All we have to do is just bring some more compost in, re-amend roughly about 5 to 10% of the overall soil, and we're back to normal. We're back to right where we should be with good amounts of fertility. There's not really any soil diseases or pests that are gonna be an issue, and we're overall gonna be growing a whole lot more plants in a smaller area and for a longer part of the season. All right, now here's another thing. Don't have it set in your mind how many times a bed should be rotated through. You know, we have a bed here like these beets. Those beets are going to be transitioned out. We might plant something like beans, and we might transition into another crop like lettuce later on. 3 to 4 transitions is great, but so is 2. Like here we have our determinate Romas. These are going to be loaded up with tomatoes for a good part of the season. And so we probably won't transition this bed until about late August, maybe even early September. And so this bed might only get 2 transitions, and that's fine. So I hope you all enjoyed. I really hope that you are growing more food in your garden. I hope this encouraged you to plant out even more things in your garden. And I know a lot of you are going to say this, well, Luke, by the end of the season, I'm kind of just exhausted. I'm kind of just wore out. What if I don't want to plant anything? What I would say to that is at least plant like a cover crop. At least cover your bed with some compost. Give it some form of protection. Give it some type of mulch. Protect it at all costs, because even if you're not growing a plant, you should still be caring about the soil quality for the next season. So I hope you all are inspired to grow more food, have more fun in the garden, and give me some ideas what I should make with this broccoli harvest in the comments box down below. And we'll catch you all on the next episode. As always, grow bigger. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider checking this one out. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you so much for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's free. Consider doing that. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, rain or shine. And if you need any garden tools, supplies, or seeds, check out MIgardener.com. We got you covered. See you guys in the garden. Bye.